This past weekend, Pastor Zach walked us through some key principles in a story Jesus told in the Bible that's known as the parable of the three servants. Parables were stories that Jesus used to communicate a deeper lesson or understanding through a simple illustration. And oftentimes they had a surprise ending that would leave the audience thinking. This parable of the three servants is about three men whose master gave them talents, bags of money, to take care of. Two of the servants were diligent and hardworking with their talents, while the third servant wasn't a great manager of his. Today I want to dig in a little bit on the third servant. To hear the full parable and the principles behind it, you can listen to the message on Meck's YouTube or the Meck App. In our previous Devo, we talked about the importance of faithfulness to God in our life. The first two servants were faithful with the money they were entrusted with, whereas the third servant wasn't. What kept the third servant from being faithful? The first is that it's not easy to be faithful. In fact, being faithful takes hard work. The first two servants went out and did something with their talents, but the third servant buried his money in the ground and did nothing with it. In the words of Pastor Zach, passivity and laziness are stone cold enemies to those hoping to be faithful to God. In fact, the book of Proverbs in the Bible, written by a man named King Solomon and known as the Great Wisdom Book, it says, "People who refuse to work want things and get nothing. But the desire of people who work hard are completely satisfied." The third servant refused to do any work at all when it came to his responsibility for the money, yet he still expected to be rewarded. That's not faithfulness. The second thing that kept the servant from being faithful is that he opted for the safe choice rather than the right choice. Have you ever made a choice because it was the safe thing to do, even if the better choice was a bit riskier? Oftentimes, fear can keep us from being faithful because we don't have control over what happens. Now, there's grace for the third servant and his safe choice. In Jesus' time, burying money in the ground was the equivalent of putting it into a safe or stuffing it under the mattress. I know none of you guys are guilty of that. The goal was basically to make sure nothing happened to it. But it reminds me of this episode in an old kids show I used to watch. One of the characters had earned money for the first time in his life. While his friends were spending their money, he locked his in a briefcase and handcuffed it to himself so nothing would happen to it. Ultimately, the character became paranoid and greedy and learned a lesson about what managing money meant. Okay, none of us are doing that. At least I hope not. But the heart behind this parable is that the master wanted the servant to use what he was given. And out of fear, the servant didn't. The same thing applies to us though. God gives us things to manage or steward. Things like our house, our car, jobs, family, experiences. But he doesn't want us to become Scrooge McDuck and hoard it all away, either out of fear or greed. Instead, he wants us to live boldly, step out in courage and faith, and do the good work that he has for us. The first two servants were greeted by their master with this, "Well done, good and faithful servant." But the third servant was told, "You wicked and lazy servant," and his portion was taken from him. Reflect on this today. Which one would you rather be called? Wicked and lazy or good and faithful?